1.2 million copies sold, a rumored 70% refund rate. Somehow, the majority of players for a first-party PlayStation game are on PC. There have been so many numbers flying around, so many rumors about Marathon, and I understand why people are uneasy after watching so many live service games just disappear, sometimes within weeks of launch. The instinct is to brace for impact, and that makes complete sense. But I've been thinking about this a lot, and when I actually just sit down, I look at the full picture, I really do not think that Marathon is in the danger zone that people are assuming. Yeah, week over week, the player base, at least on Steam, is dropping, but that's to be expected. The game came out, there's always going to be a huge spike at launch, and then it trickles down until a new season and stuff like that. And I, for one, didn't really think that Marathon was going to be this giant game. Even Arc Raiders, after that game came out and there were so many people playing it, I still didn't feel like Marathon was meant to be this massive game. Now, people will argue that and be like, well, Sony bought Bungie for almost $4 billion. Of course they thought it was going to be that. I don't know. I don't know how much I believe that. We're going to talk about that later on. But if you enjoy Marathon content and you want to stay up to date with stuff, make sure you sub to the channel. I'm trying to hit 26,200 subs by the end of the year. That's the Marathon number. And I know a ton of you, over 90%, watch the videos and you aren't subscribed. I know it's not that big of a deal on YouTube anymore, but it would mean a lot to me. So thank you. If you sub, make sure you like the video if you enjoyed it and hype it and all that stuff. Let's get into it. So the most important thing to understand here is that Marathon was never the reason Sony spent $3.6 billion on Bungie. That acquisition was announced in January of 2022. Marathon wasn't even publicly known yet. They hadn't had a trailer or gameplay or anything like that. We had leaks and rumors and stuff like that. But the deal was built around what Bungie had already proven it could do. The acquisition was really about the Destiny franchise and the live service expertise Bungie had built around it. Really, that's the two things that Sony was paying for, and maybe those other games that were being worked on behind the scenes that later went to other Sony studios. I really do think that Sony just didn't understand live service games. So many had been created and canceled and before they even came out. And Sony really, really wanted to capitalize on this live service stuff. They had Helldivers, and that came out. Helldivers 2, I guess, came out, and that was a huge success, but they wanted more. And Destiny had been running for nearly a decade, building a fan base and revenue in ways that PlayStation single-player output just never could. Sony looked at Bungie as a template, and they were just buying that. They wanted that knowledge. So the framing of Marathon underperforming, therefore the acquisition was a mistake, doesn't really hold up to me. I still think that the bet was on Destiny and Bungie's ability to run long-term live service games. Marathon, to me, was always the longer-term upside, the potential of a new IP, not the core, reason they bought it. I still think that there are things happening behind the scenes with Destiny. I don't think that it's just going to be over and they've completely abandoned it. I think that's very silly to think. But I don't just see Bungie and Sony looking at this game and saying, nope, cancel it, get it out of here. I never thought that in the first place. The worst case scenario is, they start to lay people off and it becomes like a skeleton crew. But I really do think that there's a ton of potential with this game. The other thing that's been talked about to death is Arc Raiders. And while some comparisons are fair, others just aren't. Arc Raiders does have significantly more players. The numbers don't lie, and I've seen a ton of player count numbers from Steam and stuff, and it's Arc Raiders has 100,000 people still playing, and Marathon has 30K or whatever it is. And really, if you do some math, you'll see that Marathon has a better retention rate as of right now. Arc Raiders has gone from 400 and some thousand to 100K. Anyways, but back in the day, Arc Raiders wasn't even a known quantity when Sony decided to buy Bungie. That deal had nothing, it had nothing to do with Arc. Back in the day, the extraction shooter genre was Tarkov and Hunt and not much else. So all these comparisons to Arc it just doesn't make sense to me. They're completely different games, not only from the point of view, but just philosophically, just not the same game. But what I will say is that the competitive landscape for extraction shooters has completely changed, and Bungie and Sony are navigating something that is completely different from what people were planning for, 40 years ago. Destiny 2 has had rough stretches throughout its life, and after the final shape, which just wrapped up a decade-long story arc, player numbers dropped, and subsequent updates just aren't hitting the same. And I don't think that that's necessarily what Bungie didn't think was going to happen. Like, I would assume that they were like, all right, we finally finished telling the story. People stayed around to finish the game, finish the story, and now they're going to leave. I think a lot of people always point out, oh, Bungie abandoned Destiny for Marathon. I don't think that's true at all. I think that they finally wrapped it up, and they didn't really think that the player count was going to explode or stay the same. Like we've had the Destiny Star Wars collabs and stuff like that, but I just feel like people moved on. These feel kind of like Rise of Iron-esque updates, if not smaller, and it's just something to hold people over until whatever the next thing is. Whether that's Destiny 3 or Destiny the prequel, I don't know, but I think it's very naive to think that they're just done with it. Another comparison, Concord. It's understandable because Concord is such a crazy thing that happened in gaming, but to me, the two situations completely different. Concord got 2 weeks maybe, and Marathon is already a month old. It's sold way more copies. It's trending positively, both from people playing the game and from critics. It's got the Cryo Archive, an in-game activity. It's got consistent patch updates. There's the mid-season update coming on April 14th. There's an active listening and iterating development team, not one that's been just told to wrap it up. I also believe that, you love him or hate him, but Paul Tassi has some, insider information at Bungie, and said that there are no current plans to scale back content. Future seasons are already in development. And a game that missed these probably ridiculous numbers, but has a stable player base and a positive critical reception and an active update cadence is in a very different situation than a game that launched to how under 1,000 people played Concord, I think, at its peak. And to me, there are plenty of live service games that have started slow and then they, found their footing over time as more and more content get added, Warframe and stuff like that. The genre definitely rewards patience more than any other, and I think with Marathon, you're going to see that over time, the player base is going to get increased as they add more things to the game and new seasons and stuff like that. I think this first season, it's going to be the lowest point that it'll be, and then the next season will come out, there'll be a spike, and as long as they're adding things and giving what the community wants and stuff like that, I think that Marathon absolutely will grow. That's just my opinion. Another crazy thing is shutting down Bungie. And could Sony do that? Yes, they could. They've canceled projects and closed studios before. They absolutely cut losses. But I think that there's a meaningful difference between canceling a project and what I would say is smaller studios than shutting down a almost 1,000 person studio that they paid almost $4 billion for. That's not the same decision. If you actually sit there and think about what it requires to do that, you're just destroying the Destiny IP, throwing that out the window. You're sending a clear message to every studio in the industry about what working with PlayStation looks like when things tend to get a little bit more hard. And they've already had a huge reputational hit with how they handled Concord and things of that nature. And Sony's already taken a hit. They recorded a $200 million impairment on Bungie assets in 2025, which is their way of admitting the acquisition underdelivered. The response was not to close the studio, it was restructuring and layoffs and getting rid of some leadership. And that's what good damage control looks like, just not burning the whole thing down. And I think that a lot of people point at revenue, and it's way more nuanced than just raw sales figures. They look at how many copies were sold, but you don't have access to microtransactions and things like that. So if even a fraction of the player base is spending money on the store, that math just gets more favorable. Live service games don't need to be blockbusters. They need to cover the operating costs and grow slowly. Marathon seems to be doing that at a minimum. Now, none of this is meant to say things are just honky-dory, this is great. The launch obviously was quieter than Bungie or Sony wanted. The PS5 numbers are kind of puzzling to me for a first party title. I get like gamers on consoles, you know, they're called casuals and things like that. And I think there are real questions about whether Marathon can grow its player base meaningful over this like next year. All those concerns aren't wrong. Like, I do see Marathon maybe not becoming just straight up free to play, but being added to PlayStation Plus or Game Pass or something over time. But this is concerning, and this is doomed are just different conclusions. And right now, I think that it's more towards, you know, it's concerning. I think Sony has way too much invested to just walk away. Bungie is still updating the game. Destiny is still on the table for the future. And I think that there is a dedicated audience right now that seems to genuinely love Marathon. I personally love Marathon. I had no idea if that game was going to be for me when it was like announced and everything. I never got to play in any of the early alpha stuff. Like, extraction shooters were not my cup of tea. I fell out of love with like Destiny and Destiny 2. I know Bungie had a ton of, you know, ill will and just a lot of bad press leading up to it. And I can honestly say, after putting a ton of hours into it, that it's one of my new favorite multiplayer PvP games that I've played in years and years and years. I do think that there are things that they can change, you know, like onboarding and things like that. And a lot of this stuff, to me, seems, you know, I'm not a game dev, but seems simple. Like, the community has spoken, and, you know, critics and stuff like that. Like, people have said what they want changed about the game. The anti-cheat, oh my God, we need to fix that. But sometimes a game just needs time, and Marathon seems like one of those cases. Now, for all those people who have not made it to the end of the video and are screaming at me in the comments about how, you know, like, I'm a Marathon shill and stuff like that, I just try to look at this like from a point of view that's like higher up, you know? At the end of the day, if the game shut down and I can't play it anymore, I'm not gonna sit here and cry, you know, like, I will go play a different game. I really only upload games and commentary about things that I enjoy or that I'm passionate about. You know, for a long time that was Destiny, and then for a long time that was Halo, and now it's been Marathon. And I want to see the game survive and thrive because I enjoy it a ton. But at the end of the day, this is not my job, and, you know, like, Bungie's not sending me a paycheck to talk about the game. I genuinely enjoy it. So that's it for the video. That's where I am with it all. I'm cautiously optimistic, I guess. If you've been playing, I'm actually curious what platform you're on and how you feel about where the game's heading. And if you think I'm reading this whole thing wrong, just let me know in the comments down below. I am happy to be challenged on things. I don't think that you grow as a person just by like locking yourself in an echo chamber and stuff like that. So I genuinely read every comment, and if they're respectful and stuff like that, I do take them to heart. I try to respond to all of them. But that's it for the video. I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace.